would you do if a freezing child showed up at your doorstep, begging for help? Would you turn him away, thinking someone else would handle it? Or would you open the door knowing that one simple decision might change both of your lives forever? For Lucas Warren, that choice seemed easy. He didn't have time for complications. But when he finally let that child in, he had no idea. He was stepping into a battle far bigger than he ever imagined. Because this boy wasn't just lost. He was running from something, or someone, and the truth he carried with him would turn Lucas's world upside down. Before we continue, tell us where in the world you're watching from. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The Chicago wind howled through the empty streets, cutting through the thickest coats like a knife. Snowflakes swirled under the glow of street lamps, covering everything in a fresh, untouched layer of white. Warren barely noticed. He dragged himself down the hallway of his apartment building, his leather briefcase weighing far heavier than usual after a brutal 14-hour workday. His muscles ached, his mind fogged with exhaustion. All he wanted was a hot shower and silence. Reaching into his coat pocket, he fumbled for his keys, the freezing metal biting against his fingers. The hallway was empty, save for the muffled hum of city life outside. He let out a sigh, pressing his forehead against the doorframe for a second before unlocking the door. And then he heard it. A faint scratching sound. Lucas stilled, his pulse slowing as he turned his head. The noise was barely audible over the wind, but it was there, a soft, desperate scraping against the wood. His brows furrowed. What the hell? Lowering his gaze, he saw it. A small, curled-up shape pressed against his door. At first, his tired mind couldn't process it, but then the details hit him all at once. A child, no older than 10. His brown hair matted with ice, his thin hoodie completely soaked from the falling snow. He was shaking violently, arms wrapped around himself in a feeble attempt to hold on to whatever warmth he had left. His attention next. A small black and tan mutt curled around the boy's chest, trying to shield him from the cold, its fur dusted white with snow. The dog was shivering too, but still pressed closer, offering whatever heat it had. Lucas's stomach twisted. The boy lifted his head, and Lucas froze. Wide, terrified eyes locked onto his. Big, hollow eyes. Lucas knew that look. It wasn't just the look of a lost kid. It was the look of someone running from something. He swallowed hard. This wasn't his problem. He didn't have time for this. He turned back to his lock, muttering, "Someone else will find you, kid." The boy didn't move. The dog let out a small, whimpering cry. Lucas's fingers hovered over the key. "Don't do it. Walk inside. Close the door." The scraping sound came again, weaker this time. Lucas clenched his jaw. Damn it! Before he could talk himself out of it, he exhaled sharply and unlocked the door. The warmth of his apartment rushed out, hitting both the boy and the dog like a gust of summer air. The dog immediately bolted inside, heading straight for the heating vent. The boy didn't. He stayed frozen in place, his muscles tense like he expected to be kicked out at any moment. Lucas sighed and gestured toward the door. "Well, you coming or not?" The boy hesitated. Then, slowly, he stood up still, clutching the dog to his chest and stepped inside. And with that, Lucas Warren's world changed forever. The warmth of the apartment did little to ease the tension in the air. Lucas Warren stood near the doorway, arms crossed, eyes locked on the small, shivering figure in front of him. The kid was still holding onto the dog, clutching it like a lifeline, his oversized jacket soaked, his jeans stiff from the cold. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Lucas sighed and ran a hand down his face. What the hell am I supposed to do now? He hadn't planned for this. His life was built on logic, order, predictability. Taking in a half-frozen child and a stray dog wasn't part of any plan. But there was no undoing what had already happened. He couldn't put them back out there, not in this weather. The doga scrawny thing with dull brown fur lifted its head and let out a weak whine. The kid stiffened, holding it closer, his fingers trembling. Lucas exhaled. "You're soaked. Take off your jacket before you freeze." The boy didn't move. Lucas felt his patience thinning. "Look, kid, I'm not going to hurt you. But if you stand there shaking like a leaf much longer, you're going to pass out." Still, the boy hesitated. But then, slowly, he peeled off the wet jacket, revealing a thin frame that made Lucas's stomach tighten uncomfortably. The kid was way too small for his egg malnourished, probably. His hoodie underneath was tattered, sleeves frayed at the ends. Lucas grabbed a clean towel from the hall closet and tossed it onto the couch. "Dry off." The boy hesitated, then moved cautiously toward the couch, sitting on the very edge, like he was ready to bolt at any second. He wrapped the towel around himself and the dog, his small hands gripping the fabric like it was the only thing anchoring him. Lucas watched for a moment, then headed into the kitchen. His first instinct was to call someone, the police, child services, literally anyone who would take this out of his hands. But something stopped him. The look in that kid's eyes. The way he flinched every time Lucas moved too fast. The way he refused to make eye contact. The way he held onto that dog like it was the only good thing left in the world. Lucas leaned against the counter, running a hand through his hair. Shit. Instead of calling anyone, he grabbed a bottle of water and a protein bar from the pantry. It wasn't much, but it was something. When he returned, the boy was watching him carefully, his dark eyes wary, calculating. Lucas held out the bottle first. "Drink." The boy hesitated, then took it with both hands, twisting the cap off with slow, deliberate movements. He sipped cautiously at first, but within seconds, he was gulping it down. Lucas noted every detail, the sharp collarbones peeking through his hoodie, the way he kept one arm protectively around the dog, even while drinking. "Eat, too." Lucas tossed the protein bar onto the coffee table. The boy's gaze flickered toward it, hunger flashing in his eyes, but he didn't move. Lucas narrowed his gaze. "Go on. It's not poisoned." That got a reaction. The boy's lips twitched, almost like he wanted to smirk but didn't dare. Finally, he reached out, snatching the bar quickly like someone might take it away from him. He unwrapped it with practiced speed, as if he was used to eating fast before someone could steal his food. Lucas leaned back against the armchair across from the couch, watching. The kid ate the whole thing in under 30 seconds, barely chewing. "Jesus," Lucas muttered. "When's the last time you ate?" The boy froze, fingers tightening around the empty wrapper. Lucas instantly regretted asking. Too soon. "Never mind," he said, sighing. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated, then finally Noah. "All right, and the dog?" The boy Noah rubbed the pup's ears, his expression softening just slightly. "Shadow." "Shadow, huh?" Noah nodded. "He follows me everywhere, like a shadow." Lucas had to admit, it was a fitting name. There was a pause before Lucas spoke again. "Where are your parents, Noah?" Instant tension. Noah's entire body locked up, his hands stilled on Shadow's back, his expression shut down completely. Lucas recognized it instantly, the same look he'd seen on witnesses in court when they were about to lie through their teeth. The kid wasn't going to answer. Lucas sighed. "Okay, fine. Let's try a different question. Where the hell were you sleeping before you ended up outside my door?" Noah's gaze flickered to the window, as if he was weighing his options. Finally, he whispered, "Outside." Lucas felt something twist in his chest. "The whole time?" he pressed. A small nod. "Jesus Christ." Lucas leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Noah, listen to me carefully. I can't just let a kid sleep outside in the dead of winter. If you tell me who to call someone who actually gives a damn about you, I'll do it." Noah's face twisted with something close to panic. "No, you can't call anyone." The outburst was sudden, raw. Lucas's eyebrows shot up. "Why not?" Noah's chest rose and fell rapidly, his grip on Shadow tightening. his lips pressed into a hard line, like he was fighting something inside himself. Lucas let out a slow breath. "Kid, what are you running from?" Nothing, no answer. But the look in his eyes, that told Lucas everything he needed to know. He wasn't just a runaway, he was scared. And not just of the cold. Lucas ran a hand over his jaw, thinking he could call Child Protective Services, but that look in Noah's eyes told him exactly how that would go. He'd bolt. And if the kid ran back out into the snow, this time, he might not make it. Lucas sighed, already regretting his next words. "All right," he muttered. "You can stay here tonight." Noah's head snapped up. Disbelief flashed across his face. "Two can?" Lucas shot him a dry look. "You want to sleep outside again?" Noah shook his head quickly, clutching Shadow like he still couldn't believe this was real. Lucas pointed to the couch. "You sleep there. No funny business. I don't want to wake up and find my television missing." That made Noah hesitate. Then, for the first time since he walked in, the corners of his lips twitched upward. Lucas shook his head. "Jesus, what the hell am I getting myself into?" He grabbed an extra blanket from the hallway closet and tossed it onto the couch. As he turned to leave, he heard a quiet voice behind him. "Thank you." Lucas paused. He didn't turn around, didn't respond, just ran a hand over his face, exhaled heavily, and walked toward his bedroom. As he shut the door behind him, he knew one thing for certain. His life was about to get a whole lot more complicated. Lucas Warren was never one to second-guess his decisions. His life was built on logic, on making the right call based on facts, not emotion. But as he stood in his kitchen the next morning, watching Noah Carter eat like he hadn't had a meal in weeks, Lucas knew he had just stepped into something far bigger than he'd anticipated. The kid didn't just eat devoured. The toast, the scrambled eggs, the bakongon in minutes. Lucas leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee, taking note of every small detail. The way Noah hunched over his plate, as if someone might take his food away. The way he barely spoke, only glancing up when he thought Lucas wasn't looking. The way Shadow never left his side, like the dog was guarding him from an invisible threat. Lucas set his mug down with a quiet clink. "So Noah, you gonna tell me what you're running from?" Noah froze mid-bite, his grip tightening on his fork. "There it is." Lucas leaned forward, voice calm but firm. "I need the truth, kid. Where were you before this?" Noah swallowed hard, setting his fork down carefully. "Nowhere." "Bullshit." The word came out sharper than Lucas intended. Noah flinched, his shoulders tensing. Lucas sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, I'm not trying to scare you, but if you're in trouble, I need to know." Noah hesitated. Then, in a voice so soft Lucas almost missed it, he whispered, "I can't go back." That was all it took. Lucas felt his pulse quicken. Go back where? And to who? He had to find out. When Noah fell asleep on the couch that afternoon, curled up under the blanket with Shadow nestled against his chest, Lucas made his move. His laptop. He started with a missing persons search. Nothing. No recent reports matching Noah's description. Then he tried a state foster registry search. Bingo. Noah Carter, 10 years old. Entered the foster system at age 6. Last placed under the guardianship of Richard Holloway. Lucas stilled. That name. He knew that name. A quick legal search pulled up a list of complaints against Holloway, allegations of mistreatment, neglect, 3 separate child endangerment reports. All dismissed. Lucas clenched his jaw, scrolling through the documents. How the hell does someone like this still have kids under his care? And then, something caught his eye. Missing. Former foster kids of Richard Holloway. Their cases had been quietly closed, deemed runaways. Lucas felt his stomach drop. Number, no way. This isn't just a bad foster home. This is something else. Something worse. He picked up his phone and scrolled to a contact he hadn't spoken to in months. Detective Olivia Hayes. Lucas Warren. Olivia greeted as she slid into the booth across from him at a quiet diner on the west side of Chicago. "It's been a while. Thought you only called when you needed someone to bail you out of trouble." Lucas smirked. "Still got that detective charm, huh?" She raised an eyebrow. "What's up?" Lucas didn't waste time. He slid his phone across the table, screen showing Richard Holloway's case history. Olivia's expression hardened. "You know this guy?" Lucas asked. "I know his type," she muttered. "Foster parents who collect kids for the state money and don't give a damn about them. Some are just neglectful. Others," she exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "Let's just say they're worse." Lucas didn't miss the flicker of something dark in her eyes. 3 child endangerment reports, 2 missing kids. Lucas tapped the screen. "And now, I've got a 10-year-old kid who just ran from him." "He's with you?" Lucas nodded. "Showed up at my door in the middle of the night, half frozen with his dog. Said he can't go back." Olivia rubbed her temples. "Damn it." Lucas leaned in. "Tell me what you know." She hesitated. Then, lowering her voice, she said, "Holloway has connections. The kind that make cases against him disappear." Lucas narrowed his eyes. "You think he had something to do with those missing kids?" Olivia looked at him like the answer was obvious. "What do you think?" Lucas needed to hear. That night, back at the apartment, Lucas sat down across from Noah. "We need to talk." Noah stiffened, shadow shifting against his leg. Lucas kept his voice calm but firm. "I know about Richard Holloway." The color drained from Noah's face. Lucas pushed forward. "I know you ran from him, and I know you're scared. You don't want to talk about it." Lucas nodded slowly. "I get that, but you need to understand something. If I don't know the full story, I can't protect you." Noah's fingers dug into Shadow's fur. "You can't protect me." "Try me." Noah's throat bobbed. He shook his head furiously, as if trying to force the memories away. But then, in a small, broken voice, he whispered, "He locks kids in the basement." Lucas felt the breath leave his lungs. "Jesus." Noah's hands trembled as he spoke. "When kids mess up or if they talk back, he takes them downstairs." His voice was barely above a whisper. "It's dark. There's no windows, no way out." Lucas felt rage coil in his chest like a live wire. "How long were you in there?" he asked carefully. Noah blinked rapidly, swallowing hard. 3 days. Lucas's knuckles whitened around his coffee mug. Noah's voice cracked. He said if I tried to leave, I'd end up like the others. The missing kids. Lucas couldn't breathe. The legal side of his brain was already moving, calculating the next steps. But the human side? The side that had spent a lifetime burying his emotions? That side wanted to kill Richard Holloway. Noah wiped at his eyes angrily, like he hated showing any weakness. "I don't want to go back." Lucas exhaled slowly, forcing down his fury. "Kid," he said quietly, "you're not going back." Noah's wide, terrified eyes locked onto his. "You promise?" Lucas didn't hesitate. "I swear." Later that night, after Noah had fallen into an exhausted sleep, Lucas stood in his office, staring at his phone. He scrolled through his contacts until he landed on Sofia Vasquez. Former foster child, former victim of Richard Holloway. He hit dial. A groggy voice answered, "Who the hell is calling me this late?" Lucas took a deep breath. "My name is Lucas Warren," he said. "I have information on Richard Holloway, and I need your help." The silence on the other end was deafening. Then soft but firm, Sophia whispered, "I hope someone would finally come for that bastard." Lucas clenched his jaw. Just about Noah anymore. This was war. Lucas Warren wasn't a cop. He wasn't a detective. He was a lawyer-own of the best in Chicago. Sure, but still just a guy who made his living navigating the legal system. Breaking into a house in the dead of night? That wasn't something he did. And yet, here he was. sitting behind the wheel of his black BMW, parked a block away from Richard Holloway's house, heart hammering against his ribs like a war drum. This was reckless, illegal, dangerous. But Noah's voice still echoed in his head. He locks kids in the basement. End up like the others. Lucas clenched the steering wheel. He had spent his entire career working within the system, believing in laws, in evidence, in fair trials. But now, the system wasn't moving fast enough. And if Richard Holloway really was making kids disappear, Lucas wasn't going to wait until Noah became another statistic. Beside him, Detective Olivia Hayes checked the clip on her service pistol before tucking it back into her shoulder holster. "You sure you want to do this?" Lucas exhaled through his nose. "Number, but I don't see another choice." Olivia gave him a sharp look. "I can't arrest this bastard without solid proof. We get inside, find evidence, and get the hell out." Lucas nodded, but his gut was a tight knot of unease. If they got caught, Holloway wouldn't just press charges, just bury them. Richard Holloway's house was a 2-story suburban monster, tucked in a quiet neighborhood where people minded their own business. The lights were off, his silver Lexus parked in the driveway. No signs of movement. Lucas followed Olivia through the backyard, boots crunching against frost-covered grass. She crouched by the kitchen window, pulled out a thin metal tool, and popped the latch in under 30 seconds. Lucas blinked. "You've done this before." Olivia smirked. "Chicago PD doesn't teach you everything." They slipped inside. The house was silent, the air thick with the scent of cheap cleaning chemicals. Lucas took in his surrounding spotless countertops, expensive leather furniture, framed photos of Holloway smiling with foster kids like he was some goddamn saint. His stomach churned. How many of those kids were still alive? A sudden creak from the second floor made them both freeze. Olivia's hand went to her gun. "He's supposed to be out." "Then who the hell is that?" They exchanged a glance. Then, with careful, silent steps, they moved toward the basement door. The wooden stairs groaned under their weight as they descended into darkness. The smell hit first musty air, damp concrete, something else underneath it, something rotten. Lucas flicked on his flashlight, and his blood ran cold. Chains. Rusty metal chains bolted into the walls, scratches in the concrete, long jagged marks like someone had tried to claw their way out. A heavy wooden door stood at the far end of the room, its edges dark with years of grime. Lucas's breath came faster, sharper. Jesus Christ. Olivia took out her phone, snapping pictures as fast as she could. "This is exactly what we need." Lucas stepped closer to the wooden door. His fingers brushed the handle and the front door upstairs slammed shut. A voice echoed down the stairs. "Who the hell is in my house?" Lucas's entire body went rigid. Holloway. Footsteps thundered above them, heavy, fast, coming straight for the basement. Olivia grabbed Lucas's arm. "We need to move. Now." But Lucas wasn't listening. He was staring at the wooden door, at whatever was behind it. He couldn't leave without knowing. Before Olivia could stop him, he twisted the handle and yanked it open. The smell was worse inside. Decay, sweat, fear. Lucas's stomach lurched. A mattress sat on the floor, stained and filthy. A single metal chair stood in the center of the room, with zip ties still looped through its armrests. A child's shoe lay forgotten in the corner. A child's shoe. Lucas had seen enough. Holloway's voice roared from the top of the stairs. "Get out of my house." Lucas barely had time to react before Holloway charged down the steps, a metal pipe gripped in his hands. Lucas barely ducked in time. The pipe swung through the air, smashing into the wall inches from his head. Holloway was fast for his size, his face twisted in rage. "You think you can just break into my house?" Lucas dodged another swing. "You're done, Holloway?" Holloway laughed a wild, unhinged sound. "No one's gonna believe you." Olivia moved before Holloway could swing again. She drove her knee into his gut. sending him staggering back against the wall. She yanked her gun from its holster and pointed it straight at his head. "The pipe," she ordered. Holloway froze, eyes flickering between her and Lucas. Lucas could see it in his face, the calculations, the way his mind raced for a way out. And then, like a switch flipped, Holloway's lips curled into a sneer. "You got no proof," he spat. "I've been investigated before. Every case got closed." Lucas's hand tightened into a fist. Not this time. He pulled out his phone and showed Holloway the photos they had just taken. The chains, the scratches, the locked room, the shoe. Holloway's face lost all color. "You're done," Lucas said again, voice low, steady. "And you know it." For a moment, Holloway looked like he might lunge at them again. Then sirens wailed outside. Police cars screeched into the driveway, their flashing blue and red lights casting shadows across the basement walls. Olivia smiled. "Guess the system still works after all." Holloway wasn't quiet when they cuffed him. He thrashed, shouting about how this was a setup, about how they didn't have anything real on him. But as the officers escorted him out, Lucas met his eyes one last time. And for the first time, he saw something that looked like real fear. The bastard knew this time he wasn't getting away. Lucas sat on his apartment couch later that night, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. Noah was curled up under a blanket, Shadow snuggled against his side. The kid hadn't said much since they got back, just kept looking at Lucas like he was waiting for something. So Lucas spoke first. "Holloway's gone," he said. "He's never coming near you again." Noah's grip on Shadow tightened. "For real?" Lucas met his gaze. "For real." A long silence stretched between them. Then Noah exhaled a deep, shaky breath like he'd been holding it for years. Lucas took another sip of whiskey, setting the glass down. "You should get some sleep." Noah hesitated. Then, in a small, hesitant voice, he asked. The kid looked so small, so uncertain. Lucas's chest tightened. "Yeah, kid," he said quietly. "You can stay." Noah smiled, and Lucas realized in that moment that he wasn't just saving Noah. Noah was saving him too. 1 month later, Cook County Courthouse. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, the kind that weighed heavy on the chest, pressing down like an invisible force. Lucas Warren had been in countless courtrooms before, had argued dozens of cases before powerful judges, but this was different. This wasn't about contracts, about corporate disputes or high-profile business cases. This was about a monster who had spent years hurting children and finally being dragged into the light. This was about Noah. Lucas sat at the plaintiff's table, straight-backed and composed, even as his blood boiled under his skin. Beside him, Detective Olivia Hayes flipped through the case files. Across from them, Richard Holloway sat smugly at the defendant's table, wearing a tailored suit, his hair neatly combed back. He looked completely unfazed, like this was just another minor inconvenience in his life. Lucas hated him for it. The bailiff called the room to order. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Marion Greer." The judge entered, taking her seat behind the massive wooden bench. She adjusted her glasses, her sharp eyes scanning the room. She had been on the bench for over 15 years. She'd seen monsters before. And now, she was staring at another one. The prosecutor, Angela Whitmore, stood first. She was in her late 40s, with iron gray hair and a sharp, deliberate way of speaking. She didn't waste time with theatrics. She let the facts speak for themselves. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, pacing slowly, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "This case is not about speculation, not about misunderstandings. It is about patterns." Without hesitation, that man, Richard Holloway, has had over a dozen foster children in his care in the last 10 years. 3 have gone missing. 2 have come forward with allegations of abuse. And one, she gestured toward Noah, who sat in the front row of the gallery, flanked by Lucas and Detective Hayes, was brave enough to escape and tell his story. Rippled through the courtroom, Angela continued, never breaking eye contact with the jury. The evidence will show you chains bolted into the walls of his basement, a secret locked room, hidden from caseworkers, statements from former children who lived under his roof and knew what happened when you misbehaved. She turned, leveling her gaze at the jury. We are not here to discuss what might have happened. We are here to convict a predator. She returned to her seat. Lucas could see the impact on the jury. Some of them leaned forward. Others shifted uncomfortably. But when Holloway's lawyer, Gregory Larson, stood up, Lucas felt his stomach tighten. Larson was good, too good. And he knew exactly what his strategy was. Ladies and gentlemen, Larson said, buttoning his pristine navy blue suit as he addressed the jury, we live in a time where allegations alone can ruin a man's life. Lucas's hands curled into fists under the table. The prosecution will show you disturbing images, chains, scratches on walls, but what they won't tell you is that these items were from before Mr. Holloway even lived in that house. The defense will prove that this is nothing more than a tragic misunderstanding. A young boy running away, confused and scared, with no evidence to back up these claims. He gestured to Noah, who shrank slightly in his seat. Lucas's jaw clenched. This is a man who has fostered over a dozen children, who has opened his home to the most vulnerable in our society. He is not a criminal. He is a good Samaritan who has been wrongly accused. It was a lie, all of it. But Larson delivered it like gospel, and some members of the jury nodded. Settle in his chest. They had to tear this man apart. When Noah was called as a witness, Lucas felt his pulse in his throat. The kid looked so small walking up to the stand, his sneakers barely making a sound against the floor. The bailiff swore him in, and Noah sat down, gripping the edge of the seat with white-knuckled fingers. Angela approached first. Noah, do you remember living in Mr. Holloway's house? Noah nodded. Yes. Can you tell the jury about it? Noah swallowed hard, his gaze darting to Lucas. Lucas gave him the smallest nod. You got this, kid. Noah took a breath. At first it was okay, but when kids messed up, he'd take them downstairs. Downstairs? Angela pressed gently. What would happen in the basement? Noah's hands curled into fists. Lucas could see the fear in his eyes, but also something else: determination. He locked us in, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Angela kept her voice steady. Did you see any other kids down there? Noah hesitated. Not always, but I heard them. His voice broke slightly. I heard them crying. Lucas felt his chest tighten painfully. Angela gave Noah a reassuring look. Did you ever try to leave? Noah's breath hitched. He said if I did, I'd disappear, like the others. That did it. Even the jury members who had been skeptical looked shaken. Angela turned. No further questions. Then Larson stood, and Lucas knew this was the moment they had to win. All fake sympathy. Noah, he said gently, you've been through a lot, haven't you? Noah nodded cautiously. And you were in other foster homes before Mr. Holloway's, correct? Another nod. And in those homes you sometimes ran away, didn't you? Lucas's stomach dropped. Noah stiffened. Two didn't run away like this. Larson smiled, like he'd just caught him. But you did run. Because sometimes you didn't like the rules, right? Noah flinched. Doubt creeping in. He leaned forward, his gaze locking onto Noah's. Stay with me, kid. You know the truth. Noah's small hands tightened into fists. Then, in a stronger voice, he said, I didn't run away. I escaped. Larson's smirk faltered. Noah's eyes flashed with something fierce. I escaped because I knew what would happen if I didn't. Larson stumbled over his words. The control was slipping. Lucas could feel it. Angela stood. Objection. The defense is badgering the witness. Objection sustained, Judge Greer said coolly. She turned to Noah. You're doing well, son. Larson sat down, his expression tight with frustration. Lucas almost smiled. They had won this round. After hours of testimony, of evidence, the photos, the chains, the shoe in the basement tight, was time. Lucas sat stone still as the jury filed back in. The foreman stood, holding the verdict in his hands. Judge Greer nodded. Jury, have you reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. Lucas's breath locked in his chest. The foreman read aloud. On the charge of child endangerment, guilty. On the charge of felony child abuse, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit human trafficking, guilty. The courtroom erupted. Holloway shot up, screaming, This is a goddamn setup. The bailiffs moved in, dragging him toward the back. Frozen, wide-eyed. And then he smiled. For the first time, really smiled. Lucas let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It was over. The monster was gone. 1 week after the verdict, Lucas Warren's apartment. The sound of boiling water filled the kitchen as Lucas Warren absent-mindedly stirred his coffee. His usually pristine, perfectly organized apartment now had signs of life scattered across it: a half-folded blanket on the couch, a pair of sneakers left haphazardly by the door, a dog toy chewed to near destruction lying under the coffee table. It was different. He was different. He glanced toward the living room, where Noah sat cross-legged on the couch, flipping through television channels, Shadow curled up beside him. The kid had barely left that spot in the last week, exhausted from everything: the trial, the interrogations, the weight of knowing his nightmare was finally over. But now he looked lighter. Lucas took a sip of coffee. He had spent years in his perfectly controlled world, where emotions were a distraction and personal connections were just liabilities. But now, there was a 10-year-old kid sitting in his living room. A kid who had no family, no home. And whether Lucas had planned for it or no, they'd become that family. Lucas placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast on the coffee table. Noah blinked at it, then looked up. For me? Lucas smirked. No, for Shadow. I figured he'd want a balanced breakfast. Noah rolled his eyes, but grinted a real, genuine grin. He grabbed the plate, shoving a forkful of eggs into his mouth. Lucas sat across from him, watching as the kid ate without the panic speed from before. He wasn't devouring his food like it might be taken away. It was a small thing, but it meant everything. So, Lucas said casually, I've been thinking. Noah paused mid-bite, looking up warily. Lucas leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. What if you stayed? Clattered onto the plate. Noah's eyes widened. Stayed here? Lucas nodded. Yeah, not just for now, for good. Lucas took a deep breath. I know this is a lot, and I know trusting people hasn't exactly worked out for you before, but I want you to know I'm not going anywhere. Noah stared at him, searching for any sign of uncertainty. Lucas didn't look away. Finally, Noah swallowed hard. You mean, like adoption? Lucas's throat tightened. Yeah, kid, like adoption. Noah's fingers curled into Shadow's fur, his shoulders tense. But what if you change your mind? Lucas felt his chest tighten painfully. How many times had this kid been abandoned? How many times had someone made a promise and then walked away? He reached over, gripping Noah's small hand firmly. I won't. Noah's lips pressed together, his eyes glistening, but he nodded slowly. Lucas squeezed his hand once before letting go. This was happening. Lucas had spent years battling in courtrooms, but he had never fought a fight as personal as this. The foster care system was a mess of bureaucracy, paperwork, and home visits, all designed to protect kids, but sometimes failing them instead. He sat across from Maggie Turner, a social worker with the state. She was middle-aged, sharp-eyed, and had spent 2 decades working with kids who had been through hell. So, Mr. Warren, she said, scanning through the stack of paperwork on her desk, You're a high-powered attorney with no prior experience raising children. You live alone, work long hours, and until recently, had no intention of becoming a guardian. What changed? Lucas didn't even hesitate. Just about saving a kid from a bad situation. It's about giving them stability, permanence. Lucas nodded. That's exactly what I'm offering. Sure you can do this? Lucas thought about the sleepless nights, the panic in Noah's eyes, the way the kid had slowly started to trust him. Then he thought about the alternative. He looked Maggie in the eye. I'm not letting him go. The following weeks were a blur of court dates, home evaluations, and meetings with child welfare officials. Lucas found himself doing things he never thought he'd do. Attending school enrollment meetings, shopping for sneakers, trying to convince Noah that vegetables weren't actually poisonous. One evening, Lucas sat at his desk, filling out yet another stack of adoption paperwork when Noah walked in. The kid was nervous, shifting from foot to foot. What if they don't let you keep me? Then we fight harder. Noah nodded, but his hands clenched at his sides. I don't want to go anywhere else. Lucas felt his heart twist. He stood up, placing a hand on the kid's shoulder. You're not going anywhere, you're home, Noah. Noah didn't say anything, but for the first time, he looked like he believed it. It happened one night after dinner. Lucas had just finished cleaning up the dishes when he felt a small tug on his sleeve. He turned, looking down at Noah. The kid fidgeted, eyes darting away like he was embarrassed. Then so quietly Lucas almost missed it. Thanks, Dad. Lucas froze. Noah realized what he said and immediately looked horrified. Too mean. Lucas didn't let him finish. Instead, he crouched down, gripping Noah's shoulders. You don't have to take that back. His voice was rough, thick with emotion. Noah blinked rapidly, like he was trying to process what just happened. Then, without another word, he threw his arms around Lucas. Lucas didn't even think. He just held on. And for the first time in his life, he realized this was exactly where he was supposed to be. 6 months later, Lucas and Noah stood before Judge Marion Greer, the same judge who had sentenced Richard Holloway. But this time, the mood was completely different. Judge Greer peered down at Noah over the rim of her glasses. Noah Carter, are you sure you want this man as your legal guardian? Noah didn't hesitate. Yeah. She turned to Lucas. And Mr. Warren, you understand this is a permanent decision? Lucas glanced at Noah, the kid who had walked into his life that freezing night, who had changed everything. He smiled. I wouldn't have it any other way. Judge Greer nodded. Then she signed the papers. Congratulations. It's official. That night, back home, Lucas watched as Noah tossed a tennis ball for Shadow in the park. For the first time, the kid looked carefree, happy, like a kid should. Lucas sat on a bench watching when Noah jogged over, flopping down beside him. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Noah spoke. Thanks for not giving up on me. Lucas felt his chest tighten. Not a chance, kid. Noah grinned. Cool, 'cause you're kinda stuck with me now. Lucas smirked, ruffling Noah's hair. Yeah, I figured. As the sun set, painting the sky in warm oranges and purples, Lucas realized this wasn't just the end of something, it was the beginning of everything. Cook County Courthouse, the final step. Lucas Warren had never felt nervous in a courtroom before. He had spent years in rooms just like this, tearing apart corporate contracts, dissecting legal loopholes, and ensuring his clients walked away victorious. But today wasn't about winning a case. It was about family. Lucas sat at the petitioner's table, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, hands clasped together on the polished wood surface. Beside him, Noah Carter, now officially 11 years old, fidgeted with the sleeve of his hoodie. His hair was a little longer now, his face fuller, healthier. He still had that wary look in his eyes, like he was waiting for someone to tell him this was all temporary. But it wasn't. Not anymore. Across the room, Judge Marion Greer adjusted her glasses, flipping through the adoption papers. Lucas had gone up against some tough judges in his career, but Greer was different. She had seen monsters up close. She had been the one to sign Richard Holloway's conviction. And now, she was about to sign the most important document in Lucas's life. She looked up, her sharp gaze settling on Noah. "Mr. Carter, do you understand why you're here today?" Noah nodded slowly. "Yeah." Greer smiled faintly. "And do you agree to the terms of this adoption? Meaning that Mr. Warren will be your legal guardian permanently?" Noah hesitated, glancing at Lucas. Lucas didn't rush him, didn't nudge him. This had to be Noah's decision. Finally, Noah straightened, squared his shoulders, and nodded. "Yeah," he said firmly, "I want to stay." Lucas exhaled, tension he didn't even realize he'd been holding draining from his body. Greer turned to him. "And Mr. Warren, do you fully understand the responsibility of adopting this child?" Lucas didn't hesitate. "I do." "And you accept all parental duties moving forward? Medical, educational, financial, and emotional support?" Lucas felt his chest tighten not from fear but from certainty. This wasn't just about legally becoming a father. He already was one. He looked at Noah and saw his son. "I accept everything, no matter what." A pause. Then Judge Greer picked up her pen. The room was silent except for the sound of ink scratching across the page. Then a final, decisive stroke. Warmth in her expression. "Congratulations, Mr. Warren. As of today, you are officially Noah Carter's legal father." The gavel struck the wood. It was done. Noah Carter was officially Noah Warren. Lucas turned to Noah, expecting relief, maybe a smile. But instead, Noah sat completely still, his eyes wide, as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. Lucas frowned. "Hey, you okay, kid?" Noah blinked rapidly, his fingers digging into the fabric of his hoodie. Then, in a small, almost broken voice, he whispered, "No one's ever picked me before." Lucas felt his heart crack wide open. Before he could say anything, Noah launched himself forward, wrapping his arms tightly around Lucas's waist. Lucas froze for a split second. Then, without hesitation, he wrapped his arms around Noah, holding him close. He could feel how tightly Noah was gripping him, like he was afraid this was all a dream, like if he let go, Lucas would disappear. Lucas leaned down, pressing a hand to the back of the kid's head. "Well, get used to it, kid. You're stuck with me now." Noah let out a shaky laugh against his chest. Lucas held on tighter. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just a man standing alone. He was a father. That evening, back at the apartment, Lucas had planned something special. Noah walked into the living room and immediately stopped in his tracks. There were balloons tied to the back of the chairs, a cake sitting in the middle of the dining table, and an oversized banner that read, "Welcome home, Noah." Olivia Hayes was leaning against the kitchen counter with a beer in hand, smirking. "Took you long enough, Warren." Across the table, Sophia Vasquez, one of Holloway's former victims, clapped Noah on the shoulder. "Told you things were going to work out, kid." Noah stared at the room, at the people, at everything. "Wait." He turned to Lucas, his expression half skeptical, half incredulous. "Is this for me?" And, duh. Noah blinked, completely overwhelmed. "But why?" Lucas sighed, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Because, kid, you've got a family now, and family celebrates the big stuff." Noah bit his lip. Then, before anyone could react, he grabbed the cake knife and cut the first slice himself. Everyone laughed as Olivia handed him a plate. Noah sat at the table, stuffing his face with cake, and for the first time since Lucas had met him, he looked like a kid. No worries, no fear, no waiting for the other shoe to drop. Just a kid eating cake with his family. And Lucas realized this was exactly where they both belonged. Later that night, as the celebration died down, Lucas sat out on the balcony, looking over the city lights. Noah stepped outside, Shadow trotting beside him. Lucas smirked. "Can't sleep?" Noah shrugged. "Too much cake." Lucas chuckled. "Yeah, I figured." They stood there for a moment, the cool night air settling around them. Then Noah glanced up at him. "Hey, Lucas?" Lucas turned. "Yeah?" Noah hesitated, shifting his feet. Then, in a voice so quiet it almost got lost in the wind, he said, "Can I call you Dad?" Felt his throat tighten. For a second, he couldn't speak. Then, voice rough, he answered, "Yeah, kid, you can." Noah nodded. And then, just before heading inside, he whispered. He knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The lessons we can learn from this story. At its core, this story isn't just about legal battles, trauma, or survival, it's about the power of choice. Lucas Warren had no obligation to open that door. He had every reason to turn away. But one small act of kindness changed 2 lives forever. So what can we learn from this? 1. Sometimes the smallest decisions have the biggest impact. We often think big gestures are what change the world. But in reality, it's the small choices offering kindness, standing up for someone, or simply listen that truly change lives. Application. The next time you see someone struggling, ask yourself, what's one thing I can do to help? Even the smallest effort can mean everything to someone. 2. Family isn't always about blood. It's about who shows up. Lucas never planned to be a father. But family isn't just about DNA. It's about the people who choose to stay, who choose to fight for you. Application. Think about the people in your life who have always been there for you. Have you told them how much they mean to you? Maybe today is the day to remind them. 3. Never underestimate the strength of survivors. Noah wasn't just a victim, he was a fighter. Despite everything, he found the courage to trust again. Application. If you've faced hardship, remember your past does not define your future. You are stronger than you think. And if you know someone struggling, remind them they are more than what happened to them. When something is wrong, many people look the other way when Holloway was hurting children. But Lucas didn't. He took action, and that made all the difference. Application. If you ever see injustice, whether it's bullying, discrimination, or abuse, then stay silent. Your voice could be the one that saves someone. Now, we want to hear from you. What did you think about this story? Have you ever experienced a moment where kindness changed your life? Share your thoughts in the comments, we'd love to hear from you. And if this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know how one story can inspire another act of kindness. Make sure to hit that like button if you believe in second chances, and subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's episode. It's one you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the smallest decisions lead to the biggest changes.